Hi, welcome back to another episode of Coldstream Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. In this week's episode, we're going to continue working on installing the 8.8 rear end and the 40 Plymouth chassis. On the last episode, I cleaned off the whole rear end. I cleaned the inside of the frame. I boxed part of it, and I installed the lower arms of the four-link. And that's as far as I could get last week. This week, if all goes well, the plan is to install the triangulated portion or the upper portion of the four links. So there is one there, so it's approximately going to fit here. So what I'll do is I'll get this all set up. I'll go through the measurements and the angles of what I'm going to put on. And then the second portion of this installation is, as I said in the last video, in part one, the coilover shocks have arrived, so going to be installing those. Here is the rear, what I'll be making the rear cross member from. So I'll go through that installation process and the angle that I choose to put them on, and hopefully we'll get this whole rear end tied in on at least the back half being a roller. So I've got the upper bars put in place now. The upper bars are parallel to the lower bars on this plane, and they're equal angle from the center. The pinion, the pumpkin on this one is basically perfectly centered, so the distance from the flange to the backing plate is exactly the same. I have these brackets, and actually the center of the top of these ends directly over the top of the center of the axle. They're the exact same angle coming out, and like I said, the upper bars are parallel to the lower bars. So what I did, I measured the distance between this nut and that nut, and then I made sure that the distance basically between this nut and that nut were the same, just by taking measurements off of the floor. So right now, all that's left is on this section here would be to actually weld these brackets to the axle. But before I do that, I actually want to put the upper shock brackets in place. So what I did in order to figure out where they're going to be is that my coilover shocks are, I guess, ride height, if you want to call it that, around 14 inches. So I went into the shop and I got a piece of hardwood here. The shocks on the top are 1.25 inches thick here, so I just took some 1.25 inch stock. I drilled 2 5/8 holes, exactly 14 inches apart, and then I have my spacers here that I got from Welder Series that will actually move the shock away from the bottom bracket. So right now, what I'm able to do is I can put 2 of those in. And what it's going to do, it's going to ballpark me where the actual upper cross member is going to fit. So there's a little bit of a play there. It's not overly critical, but I'll put it in the same place. So I'll move these over. I think it's around 15 degrees or so is where it should be. And then I'll take this rectangular tubing that I purchased here. I'll position that in the frame, and then put the 5/8 holes through that so that I have these shocks. I think it's 15 degrees. I'm going to double check that, and I'll update you as I go here. But they should be on a slight angle. So I'll carry on with that, get that upper cross member ready to go in, and we'll carry on putting the rear end in. So I had to go on Google because I was second guessing myself on the angles and see what everybody thinks about coil shock angles. And of course, there's a really wide variety of opinions. I've heard as little as 10 degrees up to as much as 30 degrees. So I did some sanity checks on my own vehicles that I'm driving. My Model A actually is set up at 10 degrees on the coilover shocks. It rides hard because it's 250 inch-pounds on a lake car. But the thing that happens is the more you change this angle, the axle is softer it rides. So what it works out to at about 20 degrees angle, you get 94% of your shock rate. So I checked the Model A Roadster over here. I'm at 20 degrees. I checked my Model A pickup at 20 degrees, so I'm going with 20 degrees on this. So with the 14-inch shock, the rule of thumb on that kind of is about 4.5 inches inboard of this shock here on the top. I did it with an angle, I did it with measurements, and actually it worked out exactly right, that compared to the distance between the bottom shock mounts and the distance in the top shock mounts, it's actually, there's 9 inches difference, or 4.5 inches inboard on both sides. So what I've done, I drilled out a hole here and I welded in a piece of thick wall steel tubing. It's approximately 5/8 ID here, so it's still hot right now. I wanted to do this while it's still fresh in my head. So this is welded in. I'm going to dress this up and I'll ream out those holes 5/8 of an inch. The other thing I did, in order to, I found an approximate location for the cross member to go in there, and I had to cut out part of the original boxing plates on the frame, which is fine because the plan is actually to put another piece of boxing plate complete. This will be welded into the frame, then there'll be a boxing plate welded around this as well, so it'll be welded on both sides when I'm done here. So I'm going to carry on. Next step is just to wait for this to cool down, dress these holes up, ream the holes out to 5/8, clean the inside of this, and carry on putting the rear cross member in. Here we are, got lots of mess right now. I have the rear cross member in. As you saw previously, I had welded the steel sleeves in. I had to dress off the face of the steel sleeves and then drill 5/8 of an inch, basically ream out the hole. It was really close to 5/8 of an inch anyways. I just cleaned it up with a 5/8 drill. So right now I have the cross member in. The wooden, I guess, shock lookalikes here are set up at 20 degrees. Everything is good. The cross member is welded into the frame. So what I'm going to do it in 2 steps. The cross member gets welded into the original frame all the way around here to the outer part. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a steel boxing plate like this, and I'm going to weld it over the top like that, and then also weld all the way around here to make sure the cross member is in place. I've got the inside of this actually coated with POR 15 because it's going to be covered up. That side's already done. I don't know if the camera lady wants to swing over here and show, I guess, go around or go through the frame, and I'll switch around. So this boxing plate is put on. It's fully welded top and bottom. I left the weld here. I didn't grind it, but the weld along the boxing plate here, it's all welded and dressed up to make it look nice and neat. So I'm going to carry on. I'm going to cut this out. I'm just going to use basically a mini grinder with a cutoff wheel onto it to cut it out. I will weld that piece on. The other thing I have to do is actually finish weld the brackets. Almost took the camera lady out with the welder there, sorry. Finish welding the brackets onto the axle, and then hopefully get those coilover shocks dummied in place and show you the finished product here soon. there we have it. We now have a 40 Plymouth rolling chassis. As you can see from the time-lapse videos, I cut out another boxing plate, I welded it in place and dressed it. I didn't show the rear end, finished welding all the brackets, but I did that as well. And then, as you can see from the time-lapse video, I took the rear end and I put new grade 8 bolts in all the suspension components, because that's what we're supposed to use here. So everything's back in, everything's back together again. With these roller tires on it right now, both the rear and the front sit about 1 inch up off of the ground from where it was when I had the post onto it. So very happy with that. You know, the frame is at that same angle as what it was when it was sitting down on the concrete. So next up, we are going to, 2 more things we have to do to this. We have to put brake pedals and a clutch pedal in. I've ordered those. I'm not sure when they're going to get here. And then also I have to install the engine and transmission. Same thing, waiting for some brackets. I may make some of those. So on next week's video, not sure if that stuff will come in or not, whether we will get to work on that or if we'll go back to work on the other New York coupe, the 5-window coupe. So please tune in next week and see what we're up to. For this week though, please like, share, tag, and subscribe. And of course, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. And everybody have a great week and take care. Thanks.